He was laughed at in court, but this defendant wasn't who they thought he was. He had come ready to rewrite the rules. The courtroom was packed, as in a high-profile case, not just a routine hearing. A low, constant murmur floated through the air, people whispering to each other. At the center of it all, standing calmly, Clint Eastwood. Leather jacket, piercing gaze, a presence that imposed silence. He wore no suit, no tie, just his legendary calm and steely gaze. He seemed neither worried nor impressed. He hardly moved, except to place his old hat on the table in front of him. Everything about his posture said one thing: I'm here because I chose to be here. But the judge wasn't buying it. Judge Harold Brenner leaned back in his chair, his gown falling awkwardly over his shoulder. He glanced disdainfully at Clint over the top of his glasses. "Mr. Eastwood," he said, dragging out his name as if in bad taste. "Do you really understand what you're being accused of here?" The room fell silent. All eyes shifted from the judge to the man standing there. Clint looked up slowly. His gaze met the judge's without an ounce of hesitation. "Yes, Your Honor, I quite understand." The judge chuckled, leaning forward sarcastically. "Are you sure? Because this isn't a Sunday debate club. You're in a court of law, sir." A few nervous laughs went up in the gallery, but Clint didn't flinch. He slowly swept his gaze around the room, watching every face, every too-tight suit, every judging eye. But in his eyes, there was something no one seemed to understand, a certainty. The judge hadn't finished. "I don't understand why we're letting you defend yourself alone. This isn't a game. You're not prepared for this." Clint opened his lips slightly, as if he were about to answer, then closed them again. A thin smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. No provocation, just confidence. The gallery felt something change, a shiver with no apparent cause. The judge interpreted this silence as weakness. He smiled. "That's what I thought." But what nobody in the room knew was that they weren't dealing with a tired old man. He wasn't there by chance. He was there for a reason. And before this hearing was over, everyone would understand why. He'd just ruined the prosecutor's beautiful staging. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular," exclaimed the prosecutor, visibly annoyed. But Clint interrupted him, his deep, calm voice echoing through the room. "What's irregular is the total lack of concrete evidence linking me to any criminal activity whatsoever." The judge's gavel banged against the desk. "That's enough," barked the judge, his face flushed with anger. "Mr. Eastwood, you're here to defend yourself, not to play lawyer. One more outburst like that, and I'll hold you in contempt." But Clint didn't flinch. "Understood, Your Honor." The prosecutor cleared his throat, trying to regain his composure. "As I was saying, permission to approach the stand," snapped Clint, cutting him off once more. The gallery gasped audibly. Judge Brenner stared at him, his face oscillating between exasperation and incredulity. "You're in no position to make demands here, Mr. Eastwood." "It's not a request, Your Honor. It's my right. The right to present a fair defense. But if you refuse to listen to me, then I'll file a motion for your recusal on grounds of manifest bias." Silence, overwhelming silence. The judge sank back into his seat, squinting as if trying to figure out what game this man was playing. "You think you're clever, don't you? All right then, step right up." Clint stepped forward, slowly, the leather of his boots crunching softly on the polished floor. All eyes were on him, heavy, but he walked as if he didn't even feel them. He placed a stack of documents on the judge's desk, his gestures precise, assured. "This is a preliminary examination of the evidence presented by the prosecution," he said calmly. "You'll see that half of it is based on conjecture, and the other half has no legitimate chain of custody." Judge Brenner flipped through the sheets, eyebrows furrowed. The prosecutor, on the other hand, looked like he was about to explode. "Your Honor, this is absurd. He can," mumbled the judge, interrupting him. He turned a few more pages before looking up at Clint. "Where did you get this?" "I made it myself," he replied simply. "And how exactly does a guy like you know how to do that?" Clint hesitated for a moment. Then his eyes fixed on the judge as he said, I read a lot." The judge squinted further, but he said nothing. The gallery held its breath. Everyone leaned forward, unable to look away. Something about his assurance changed the atmosphere. Who was this man, really? The judge's face betrayed confusion and frustration. He flipped through the documents, desperately looking for a loophole, a pretext to dismiss everything. But there was none. Every point, every argument was rock solid. "Mr. Eastwood," said the judge slowly, his tone laden with skepticism, "this analysis, where did you learn to do that?" Clint smiled slightly. "As I told you, Your Honor, I read and observe." The prosecutor was losing patience. "This is ridiculous. He's wasting our time. He's just an old man. This isn't a rhetorical contest." But the judge raised his hand to silence him. His eyes remained fixed on Clint, as if searching for something in his features. "Who are you exactly?" he asked in a voice that cut through the tense atmosphere. Clint paused, looked around the room, then back at the judge. "I'm someone who understands the law better than most people in this room, and I'm here to prove it." A murmur ran through the gallery. Whispers, hypotheses. The tension was palpable. The judge could feel it. "Enough games," he finally said, his tone less scornful than before. "What's your objective, Mr. Eastwood?" Clint took a step back without looking away. "My purpose? It's to remind you what justice really means." "I'm not just an old man wrongly accused," said Clint, his deep voice piercing the silence. "I'm a lawyer." The room exploded. Gasps, murmurs. Some even let out a "it can't be." The prosecutor slammed his hand down hard on the table. "Your Honor, this is absurd. He's obviously lying." "I'm not lying," Clint replied curtly, cutting him off. "I passed the California bar exam last year. You can check for yourself. Clint Eastwood, registered attorney." The judge stared at him, jaw contracted, trying to digest what he'd just heard. He turned to the clerk. "Check that." A new silence fell, heavier than ever. All that could be heard was the frantic clatter of the clerk's keyboard. It seemed to last an eternity. Finally, she looked up, her hands trembling. "It's true," she murmured. "Clint Eastwood is a member of the California bar." The gallery erupted again, louder this time. The judge had to bang his gavel to restore order. Even he seemed shaken. He paled as he turned back to Clint. "You're telling me," he began, his voice faltering, "that you're a licensed lawyer at your age?" "Yes, Your Honor," Clint replied calmly. "I left military school early, got my law degree and passed the bar, and now I'm here." The prosecutor stammered, his face red with rage. "This is completely irregular. He shouldn't even be allowed to." "He is allowed," cut in the judge, his voice now more composed. He leaned back slowly, watching Clint like a mystery he couldn't solve. "I've never seen anything like it." Clint tilted his head slightly, his thin smile reappearing. "You've underestimated me, Your Honor," he said. "A lot of people in this room have, but I'm not here to play. I'm here to win." Once the shock wore off, one question lingered in everyone's mind. How was he going to turn this bold revelation into a victory? The tension was electric. Clint's statement had upset the entire balance of the room. He was no longer the ordinary defendant. He had become a force to be reckoned with. Judge Brenner leaned over, his hands clasped on the desk. "Very well, Master Eastwood," he said, his voice lower but still firm. "You have our full attention. Show us what you're worth." Clint took a deep breath, calm as ever. "Thank you, Your Honor," he turned to the prosecutor. "The first problem we have to deal with is the prosecution's dependence on circumstantial evidence. Take Exhibit B, for example, the surveillance video." The prosecutor, still fuming, crossed his arms. "It clearly shows you at the scene of the crime," he said. "No," replied Clint, shaking his head slightly. "It shows a man who looks like me. But what you failed to mention, intentionally or not, is that the recording has no date, and that the video comes from an unverified source which violates the chain of custody. Without proper authentication, this evidence is inadmissible." The judge glanced at the prosecutor, frowning. "Is this true?" The prosecutor hesitated, his mouth ajar, as if desperate for words. The video is reliable." "Really?" insisted Clint, his voice calm but sharp. Because I've got a forensic analyst's report here that exposes all the inconsistencies in the file. Can I submit it to the court? The judge nodded. Clint handed the report to the bailiff, who handed it to the judge. The judge skimmed through it, his face darkening as he read. "This raises some serious questions," he murmured. The prosecutor, on the other hand, seemed to want to disappear. "Your Honor, this is nothing more than a tactic to sabotage the case." "It's called due process," snapped Clint, dryly interrupting the prosecutor. "A detail you seem to have forgotten." The gallery reacted positively, with nods and murmurs of approval. Clint could see the subtle change in the air. People were beginning to believe in him. But he wasn't done yet. He calmly returned to his table, picked up another file, and said, "Let's talk now about Exhibit D, the so-called confession." He raised the document. This document was signed after hours of interrogation, with no lawyer present. "Under federal law, this is a clear violation of my rights." "You didn't ask for counsel," retorted the prosecutor. "I didn't have to," Clint replied firmly. "Minors are entitled to legal representation. That's the law." He paused for a second, then continued, "But even if we were to take this document seriously, it's full of errors. For example, the address on the declaration is wrong. I've never lived there. It's public information." The judge's face was impassive as he turned to the prosecutor. "Do you have an explanation?" The prosecutor stammered, frantically leafing through his papers as if an answer would magically appear. You don't," cut in Clint, "because you didn't do your job. You assumed it would be an easy case. You assumed I wouldn't fight back. And yet, here I am." The judge raised his hand, again imposing silence. He leaned back slowly, his gaze fixed on Clint. "Mr. Eastwood," he said slowly, "what exactly are you trying to accomplish here?" Clint straightened his shoulders, his gaze firm. "I'm trying to show this court that justice isn't about winning or losing. It's about finding the truth. And the truth is that this case is based on fragile evidence and even more fragile hypotheses." Total silence. All eyes were on him. Even the judge seemed disarmed, as if he didn't know how to respond. The room was so silent you could hear the wooden benches creak with the slightest movement. Judge Brenner remained motionless, his eyes fixed on Clint. The arguments, precision, the confidence, it all hung in the air like a thick mist. Finally, he spoke. "Well," he began in a calmer tone than before, "Mr. Eastwood, you've clearly given us a lot to think about." Clint remained standing, his hands calmly resting on the table. He wasn't smiling, he wasn't celebrating. He waited, serene, as if he already knew what was coming next. The judge turned to the prosecutor. "Master Hensley," he said, "it is clear to me that there are significant problems with the evidence presented. The chain of custody for Exhibit B is compromised, and Exhibit D is inadmissible due to clear violations of the rights of the defense. I have no choice but to reject these elements." The prosecutor's face turned bright red. "With all due respect, Your Honor." "With all due respect," cut in the judge, this time sharply, "you should have done your job properly." "This is my courtroom," declared Judge Brenner, "and I'm not going to let this place turn into a circus." The prosecutor dropped back in his chair, defeated, and suddenly the tension in the room changed direction. All eyes turned back to Clint Eastwood. Some stared in disbelief, others in admiration. Some even nodded silently, as if to salute his silent brilliance. The judge cleared his throat, then leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Eastwood," he said, this time in an almost apologetic tone, "I must admit, I misjudged you. I thought you were just an old man in over his head. I was mistaken." Clint didn't respond immediately. He let the judge's words echo around the room, like a weight dropped to the floor. Then he said simply, "Thank you, Your Honor, but this case is not about me. It's about holding everyone here to account. Prosecutors, judges, even lawyers like me. That's true justice." The judge nodded slowly. "Well said," he replied. He took a deep breath before announcing his final decision. "Due to the lack of credible evidence and the procedural errors brought to light, I have no choice but to dismiss this case. Mr. Eastwood, you're free to go." The gallery exploded. Some applauded, Others murmured furiously amongst themselves. A few people angrily left the room. Clint stood there a second longer, absorbing it all without a word. Then, with a respectful nod to the judge, he gathered up his papers and left. As he walked down the center aisle, people spontaneously moved aside to let him pass. Their eyes followed him at every step. Some looked at him with respect, others with amazement. But Clint didn't linger. He pushed open the heavy courthouse doors and stepped out, bathed in sunlight. Outside, a reporter rushed up to him, microphone in hand. "Master Eastwood, can you tell us how you did it? What's your secret?" Clint paused. He stared calmly into the camera. "There are no secrets," he said. "The law is supposed to serve everyone, not just those who fit a mold. People like me, older, thought to be outdated, were still capable of a lot. Today, it wasn't just about defending myself. It was about proving that intelligence and determination have no age limit." Then he turned on his heels, his head held high. The crowd watched him walk away. Some were still murmuring, others seemed visibly inspired. Clint Eastwood wasn't just a lawyer or a defendant. He was a living reminder that sometimes the person we most underestimate is the one who changes everything. And at its heart, this story wasn't just about winning a case. It was about changing perceptions, breaking boundaries, and reminding us that greatness can come from anywhere. But what about you? What keeps you from breaking through the boundaries you've been set? Share your thoughts. Let's start the conversation.